And we are surrounded by so many data. One human life is value 1. 2 human lives is value 2.1. And 1,000 human lives values 1,200. Why? Because when you are saving human lives, you are not only saving human lives, you are saving the language, the traditions, the cooking recipes, you are saving the relationships between these human lives, right? So we have somehow to balance or rebalance these spaces, and we truly believe from Domestic that there is a lot of richness, intellectual richness from these green spaces, from the spaces that you live and designed.
Pau Garcia, thank you for being here. Pau's a media designer and he's founder of the Domestic Data Streamers, a Barcelona-based design office, telling data stories, you could say probably, dealing with the complexity of data and trying out tools to translate that in a way that all of us can understand it and could establish or could create empathy in a way to these often complex and difficult data. And I'm very curious about hearing more about their projects. There are 30 people in their office. They are working very international for museums, for cultural institutions, for all kind of clients. They are also teaching a lot, and we had the pleasure to also host a workshop this morning to a slightly different topic, AI, which is another interest of the office, but today it will focus more on data design, and I pass over to you, and we're happy if you join the discussion or stay for the discussion afterwards. I'm sure questions will arise. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicola and Stefan, for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited because today I will be talking about things that are quite relevant to the field. That is not only about the showcase of projects that I like, but more kind of the challenges that we face in the space of communication, specifically in the communication of complex things, such as the realities that we're living today, that are realities from a world that is quite complex, interconnected, globalized. Something that happens in China in 6 months affects us in a way that we were not expecting. So for doing that, I will make a small introduction. I will go through like a bit of these challenges, and then we will go somehow small, still very important decisions that we have made to solve these problems. My name is Pau. I'm one of the founding partners of Domestic Data Streamers. This is our studio. We are based in Barcelona, and we are a team of 30 people, mainly coming from very different fields, from journalism, artists, designers, data scientists, coders. We all work together. We have been working for the last 10 years doing what we call data experiments, which is like trying to explore which are the limits or the borders of data languages, or what we call new data languages. And these new data languages come as a kind of an answer to one of the biggest problems of our times, that is infoxication. We are surrounded by so many data. And when I talk about data, it's not about only numbers, it's about the amount of inputs. Right now I can see 3 people looking at their phones. And like this general inputs, like the way we are like incontinental, like checking our phones, checking our emails, our WhatsApps, our inboxes. Like we are totally surrounded by this kind of landscape of data, of information that is constantly creating this conversation with us, subconsciously even, right? So infoxication, we can say, and I think we all agree with that, it's one of the challenges of our time, how we can focus in things when we are so much overflown with data. And to define data is also a very kind of a difficult thing. I always gave this example. If you put data on Google Images, these are the kind of images that you get, right? Which are kind of abstract blue matrix from 2000s, right? It's not like quite good representation of data. There is some Star Trek character, but most of it is mainly kind of this very alienated, blue, odd, futuristic, weird way to relate to data, this abstract thing that lives in the clouds. And if you go to the description or the definition of data, you will see facts and statistics collected together for reference or analysis. I have never seen such a loosey description of anything. Like, it could be anything, actually, right? But the fact is that we somehow are exposed to data every day, in so many ways. Generally, when we are talking about the wall, we are exposed in the way. The cost of corruption in Europe, up to 990 billion lost annually. I know how many of you have a billion in your bank account? Can you raise your hand? Okay, good. Oh, okay, good. We are in the right place. Anyways, it's difficult to imagine how 990 billion, like what it means. Like, it's really complex to figure it out. And when we are talking about people, surprise, Germany has no clue where at least 600,000 refugees from terror hotspots are located. What the heck? What is this headline? Like, we cannot feel, our brains are not wired to really understand what is behind these numbers. What is the difference between 20,000 and 30,000? Like, we know the mathematical logic behind it, but can we understand it? And when we are talking about people, about humans, this kind of creates a kind of important thing, because we are not talking about anything. We are talking about human lives, right? So this lack of understanding is something that for a very long time, almost 10 years, we have been obsessed with. Why we don't understand numbers and statistics in a way that transcends the logical understanding, in a way that is more connected to our human side, our emotional side. So for doing that, to explore that, I want to give some of the big people that have been working on that. And the first one is this beautiful, handsome man, Gustav Fechner, with this amazing haircut. He was a German philosopher and a physicist named, that actually was the inventor of psychophysics, right? This was in the 19th century. And the psychophysics field is still a research field, very much researched. And I will do a small psychophysics experiment right now, so you can test it, right? So how many of you can see the differences between these two frames? Please raise your hands. Okay, that was fast, good. The thing is that there are 10 more dots in one side than the other. That was easy, right? Now, how many of you can spot the differences between these two? Take your time. Okay, little by little. Okay, you got it. Okay, the difference is the same. There are only 10 dots more, right? And this is somehow the basis of psychophysics. When we are exposed to big numbers, to big quantities, to big realities, we are less sensible to them. This happens with everything, and the study of psychophysics is experienced not only through visual input, but also through the way we hear things. In a festival, it's very different than when we are in a library and someone whispers into our ears, right? With the light, something really similar happens. Daniel Kahneman actually won the Nobel Award in somehow a related theory connected to that. How we experience money is very much connected to the amount of money that we have and how we invest it. And of course, the way we understand human lives is very much connected to the amount of human lives that we have to understand. And to somehow make that thing a bit more easy or more comprehensible, I want to ask you a question. Can you put yourself in the shoes of one person? Can you?
I think so.
Yes. If you are not a psychopath, apparently you are. Humans have grown through evolutionary means to be social animals, and we do so to survive. We are social animals, so we behave in groups, and therefore we have to connect and create these empathy links towards other people. So we have this skill. We can connect with each other. You can put yourself in the shoes of one and to another, right? And this idea is the main idea behind the way we have been telling stories through history, right? If you go back, you will see how photojournalism has always been telling the story of one character, even if it was portraying a whole landscape. but there was one main character of the photography, right? The same happened with films and television and even video games. There is always one main character, and that main character is the one that links us towards the reality, to the story, to the bigger idea that is behind. Because we have a problem. And the problem is the following question: can you put yourself in the shoes of two people simultaneously? That's a bit more tricky. That's very difficult because we only have to fit how we are going to put four shoes. Right? There is a physical limitation to the capacity of empathy. We see that actually nowadays in several conflicts around the world. Like, there is people that only have empathy towards one reality because we are limited in the way we can construct these links. It's very difficult to have a double thinking perspective in the way we link with other people. This is a space that has been very much studied. Professor Paul Slovic, which is one of the big ones in this field, he's the inventor of arithmetic of compassion. And for a very long time, he's from the University of Oregon, and for a very long time, he has been exploring the way we value human life in quantities, right? So since the Rwanda genocide, he was somehow kind of totally looking forward to answer this reality. We cannot wrap our head around the shame and responsible of big genocides, and still we are able to give our lives for one single person. Right? We are so much connected to the people around us, but still we don't feel anything when something happens to 1,000 people in the other side of the world. This is a reality. This is part of how we are. So he started to do like several experiments to somehow document that in a very rigorous academic way. And he did an experiment that I really like, and I think it's very somehow generous in the way it explains the nature of human being. He did this advertising. It said, any money that you donate will go to Rocky, a 7-year-old girl from Mali, Africa. Rocky is desperately poor and faces threat of severe hunger or even starvation. Right? Her life will be changed in the better as a result of your financial gift. So this was an advertising for Save the Children. And what he did was he designed this advertising. He put this picture of Rocky. And he created two groups of media press. They have very similar demographics. Right? This happened in the United States. And what happened, this experiment was repeated several times. In one group, he sent this advertising. And in the other group, he sent this advertising plus something else. He added some statistical data. He said, in Malawi, there are 3 more million like Rocky. And in Zambia, 3 more million more. Right? So every time he did this experiment, the group of media channels that were adding a statistical information, the donations of Rocky dropped by 40%. Right? Why? Thoughts? Ideas?
Too abstract.
Too abstract? But still there is a picture of Rocky.
The donation doesn't make a difference for many people.
Exactly. That's the main hypothesis behind the research. It says, we humans, even when we are giving, even when we are being altruistic and generous, we are doing it because we have some kind of retribution. It can be a moral retribution. It can be the pleasure of knowing that you are saving one life, right? But what happens when your contribution is a drop in the ocean? The retribution is too little, right? So even in these spaces, humans and the human brain is still contained by the survival instinct of looking for themselves, right? And this somehow is a bit sad, but at the same time, it was kind of a release. I said, okay, that's why, finally. So Paul Slovic did a very weird thing. That was, he kind of created this infographic about these charts about the value of human life. Here you can see 2 different graphics. The first one is the normative model of the value of human life, where 1 human life values 1, 2 human lives have the value of 2, and 6 human lives have the value of 6. Every human life have the same value. Do we agree? Okay. There is another normative model that I like the most, actually, which is the following one. 1 human life is value 1. 2 human lives is value 2.1. And 1,000 human lives values 1,200. Why? Because when you are saving human lives, you are not only saving human lives, you are saving the language, the traditions, the cooking recipes, you are saving the relationships between these human lives, right? The architecture, the way they look at the world, right? And this is something that is summed up to the biological saving of these human lives, right? I really like this one, even though it's not contemplated in the human rights of United Nations. Normally, what is placed in the human rights is that every human life is equal. Sadly, what Paul Slovic demonstrated was something that was a bit contrary to that. He showed with this experiment that the bigger the amount of human lives, the less we cared about them. The reality was that we humans were faced with somehow a challenge to perceive the value of human life in a way that was correspondent to our own values, to the way we were thinking of the world, right? So this is something that was actually reported and documented from an academic way, but this is something that has been said for a very long time for various people. A death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths are just a statistic. That was said at the military board member of Joseph Stalin, who they were experts in killing people, so they knew what they were talking about. And this is something that was not new. Like you can see people like Saul Alinsky. He was a really brilliant anthropologist and an activist for the Black and Latino movements in the United States. And every time he was designing a demonstration, he said, the police cannot kill more than 3 people. Because in the newspaper tomorrow, if they kill more than 4 people, they will say 4 people being killed. If they kill 3 people, they will put the names and the surnames of the people that were killed. And we want people in the newspaper, not numbers, right? So we somehow has always faced with the challenge of quantities over humanization of the reality. One person matters, a data point doesn't. And this is somehow one of the biggest challenges that we face today when talking about information. And of course, what I told here was about one of the extremes of information design, that is human life, which we can all connect and we can all somehow behave, but this happens with everything. One of the biggest problematics we have today with climate change is that no one gives a fuck. Like, people really don't care. Why? Because it's like super big numbers. The statistics. How are we want to change the world if these realities are somehow showed with numbers? Right? And this is a slide I love because it shows somehow one of the first infographics ever from William Playfair, 18th century, and this was from 2019, before COVID. And you can see that somehow the tools that we have to visualize information in the last 300 years, they have evolved. Now we have colors. Now we have a bit of movement, right? And the things are more designed, like the typography, the fonts are much better. But you compare the evolution of design in how we express information, and you compare the amount of information that we have to handle, and it has no sense, really. Like, it's totally unbalanced. So again, I think one of the biggest challenges is like, well, we don't have the tools to comprehend information in the amount and the speed that we have to. And this somehow creates something that is very dangerous, which is a lack of empathy. How we are gonna connect with realities outside of our own circle, of our own country, of our own ecosystem or race or even species, right? If we are not capable of understanding the complexities between these wicked problems, right? Because a lack of empathy comes with something that is a lack of action. If we don't care about something, what are we gonna do to change it? right? If we don't care about corruption in Europe because we don't understand the numbers, why are we going to do anything to change it? So, for doing like this kind of exercise, this is a very annoying reality that we have faced for a long time, and today I will not give you a solution, sadly. But we have been trying for a long time in how to handle this big problematic. What I want to bring here is that, like, this question mark. How we are going to solve this problem, because it's a big one and it cannot be solved only from one set of minds. Like, it needs kind of a more ecosystem solution to it. So for us, the solution that we have found have gone to go from infographics to info experiences, to the idea of transforming these very objective, traditionally visual ways to show information into something that could expand through all our senses, through our sense of taste, through our sense of smell, through the tactile movement. So I will give you several examples today of how an info experience could be done and the potential impact that it could have on people. The first one tries to answer like several questions, like how many emails are sent in a minute? How many letters are sent in a minute? How many evictions are done in a minute in Spain? And how many earthquakes? How many divorces happen, right? So for doing that, a visualization that we tried to do was called In a Minute. And what it was doing was actually transforming emails into actually this moment. The coffees and the earthquakes could be transformed into this. The divorce will be transformed into this scissors movement. And the evictions will be transformed into this keys moving. What was important about this was like the sensory aspect of it. And of course, like this is an experiment, but it was trying to answer something that is a bit more deep, that is how we can make bridges for people to comprehend certain things. There is this quote that I truly love from Saul Wurman, the inventor of the information architecture concept, who said, we only truly understand something when we can relate it to something we already understand. And this has a lot to do with the idea how we use poetry, for example, how we use metaphors to talk about certain things. Metaphors are shortcuts for the brain. We are somehow making people jump from one place to the other with something that they already know, right? And on that direction, I wanted to show one of the first experiments we ever did with data physicalization, transforming information into something physical that people could experience in a three-dimensional realm. The project was called Sunfolds, and it was in the Contemporary Art Center in Barcelona. And we had a bit of a challenge in this case. The curators of the exhibition, the people that were setting up the whole exhibition, they told us, we don't know how to quantify the impact of an artwork on the audience. We have very qualitative feedback from other curators, from people that come to the exhibition, and later on they say, hey, this exhibition was good, this artwork was better, maybe this one you should move it to the end because it's more grandiose. But we never had a quantitative approach to the impact that an artwork has on people. So we said, well, it's impossible to quantify the impact of an artwork because an artwork is subjective. The impact that it creates is quite subjective. It depends on your background, on your history, and what it resonates on you. But something that we can quantify is the attention that you give to certain artworks. So what we did, that was in 2015, we started to use Kinect cameras all over the place to do something that right now is quite like a normal thing in most of the stores, that is use cameras to track the amount of time that people spend in front of one artwork or the other. It will be like a Google Analytics for a museum, right? So we will track how much time people spend in front of one artwork or the other. Now, when we had all this data, we said, okay, we could share that with the museum and tell, well, in this place there is like kind of a bottleneck. So you should move this artwork to another place. Or this one, no one cares about this. You can take it out for the next exhibition that you do. But we said, let's do something different. Let's try to give this information not to the people from the museum. Let's give this information to the audience themselves and see how they react. So for doing so, we said, which is the best way to transform this data, that at the end is a data that is talking about time, about attention, into something that could be shared in a physical space. And we said, well, maybe we could transform that into sand clock, into something that for every second that someone is looking to an artwork, it will drop a grain of sand. It will create this infographic. This was one of the first prototypes, very shitty one, as you can see. But it was perfect to realize that sand is very regular. So you cannot have like 2 grains of sand in the same way. So we had to go back to Alicante to find a kind of sand that comes from marble, from cutting marble, that is super regular. Then we discovered that this sand was cancerogenous, so we could not use it. And we had to go to another place. But anyways, we discovered exactly the mechanism that we had to find. We somehow met with the people that could make these sand clogs, because the glass had to be very resistant, because sand can erode very much the limitations of the glass, right? So we're building these sand clogs, handmade specifically to resist this amount of attention transformed into sand. And it ended up in these 5 sand clogs that were at the end of the exhibition, transforming all this information into sand. And several things happened. The first thing was that when the people arrive at the end of the exhibition, they will see that there was one artwork that people had been observed for more time. And they said, whoa, I want to see this artwork again. So they get back and they spend more time in front of the artwork. So more sand falls in the artwork. They created this feedback loop that is exactly what happens in Instagram, in Facebook, in all these social platforms that are somehow nurtured by the attention of people. The more likes something has, the more likes he gets. Right? And this is a feedback loop. Somehow in 2016, we were imitating something that will happen in social media in the same way. Another thing that happened was the day of the opening, I was, of course, very happy, and I was showing the whole exhibition to my family. We did the whole tour with them, and I was showing the place, and I saw an elderly man in front of one of the artworks. And after a while, almost 30 minutes, I did another tour with a group of friends. And then he was the man, he was the man there, still in front of the artwork. And I asked him, are you okay? Do you need anything? And he told me, well, I'm just giving my time to this artwork because I like it very much. And I said, chill, this person is connecting with an inanimate dead object just to give the time, just because we have made visible something. If we can make someone connect with a dead object, imagine what we can do if we do it with humans, right? And the last thing that happened was the day before the opening. We were obviously very nervous, so we were kind of testing everything the day before until quite late at night, 2 a.m. So we were closing the museum. We left the installation all set up, all clean, ready to work the next day for the opening. And the next day we arrived. We were the first ones. We opened the museum, and there was already sand in there, like a small mountain. And then we said, well, we screw up. This is not working. We started to look at the code, at the programming, at the axis. We didn't know what happened. And then we look at the cameras, and what we discovered is that the installation was not tracking the attention of visitors, because there were no visitors during night, but the amount of time that the cleaning personnel was spending in each room. So we had very concise data about how they were distributed through the exhibition space, which is metadata at the end. In any case, one of the big things that somehow appeared into our minds through these experiments was that one of the complex things about data is that it's normally understood as a monologue. Someone has data, knows data, and somehow tells data, and people listens and says, oh, interesting. And this is not exactly how data works. Data is a two-way direction. We have to build conversations to actually make people understand information. Right? A couple of examples of how this has been done in the past. One is from the Michigan State University. So this is a kind of a drone picture from this university, from the university campus. And what the architects did was something that is beautiful and very humbling. That was when they were asked to build and design the path that will connect all the campus buildings. They said, we don't know. like we truly don't know which are the best path. So what we will do is we will plant grass all over, and we will just let the students to go around, and then in a year we will take a picture of the path that they have been doing, and then we will create the path based on that. So they did so, and of course this was not what they were expecting. These kind of things were kind of weird. But the thing is that they didn't know that there was a music band that every Thursday was moving from one place to the other. They didn't know that the mathematics groups love to stay in this area, so they do this shortcut to go to the building to eat earlier, right? They didn't know all like these very human things that build the spaces. So what they did was something that for me is truly smart. They just left the space for the patterns to appear. And for me, this is a beautiful data visualization. This is like a visualization of where the people go. And it's a visualization that was building the architecture of the space itself. And somehow tells a lot about designers and architects. We tend to think that we have the solution of the problems, but then people just do their shit around. So we have somehow to balance or rebalance these spaces, and we truly believe from domestic that there is a lot of richness, intellectual richness from these green spaces, from the spaces that you live and designed, that you live just for people to use, to rethink, to rethought. Right? And going on into, like, in that sense, the conversation in this space was based on just leaving enough green space for people to talk with their steps, right? Other spaces of conversation are like these two guys that I met in Venice Beach in California. And I saw a queue of people giving them money, and I said, how is that possible? So they were not asking for money, they were asking which religion cares most about the homeless. Smart. This was a beautiful data visualization. At the same point, they were not asking for money, but they were doing so in a very simple way. They were just using humor, in this case, to create a relationship with the people, right? And it was in this relationship that people were willing to collaborate, to participate on that space, that they wanted to be part of that, right? So, based on some of these examples, we started to think about how we could, instead of doing visualizations that somehow extract information from an audience, like the one you have seen with the sun clocks, how we could do it in a way that people consciously participate from it. And that was one of the original ideas behind Antigona. Antigona was an exhibition that we did in a very particular space. It was a prison, it was La Modelo prison, and this is a very important space in Catalonia, specifically in Barcelona. It's in the middle of the city, and it's a prison that during the dictatorship it was used as a political prison, so it's politically charged. It was actually working until 2016, so still worked for a very long time after the dictatorship. And at some point, they decided to move all the prisoners. It was in a very centric spot, so they wanted to build a music school for kids, and so on. We wanted to use the space. So they decided, before like demolishing part of the prison, to actually open it to the city of Barcelona. We were one of the selected projects to work in it. So I remember the first day I went there. It was quite crazy. That was one of the images. You could see like everything still, like you could feel like the whole atmosphere. It was like really, really charged. And you could still read on the walls, "Only God will judge me." Like all these kind of things that you could see, like you could feel. So we decided to do a project that will talk about justice, right? But not justice, about what we feel that today is justice. What are the moral dilemmas around justice? And what are the differences between what we believe is morally good and what is legally good, right? So we partnered up with one of the biggest law firms in Spain to actually explore which were the boundaries between moral and legal. And what we did was to create a series of scales that will end up in each of these rooms. Each of these scales will be asking one question, right? And the people will be able to vote by themselves by taking a stone and placing that stone in one side of the scale or the other. The questions were questions like, an innocent person in prison or 10 guilty people on the streets? Who votes for 10 guilty people in the street? There is a right answer. Okay, so every question, these were the answers that we got. So the right legal answer to that is always 10 guilty criminals in the street. And that's the presumption of innocence. That is something that is, in most of European countries, something that is quite accepted. There were other questions in other rooms, like, does the life of an elderly person or a sick person have the same value as the one as a younger one? Healthy? Who thinks it has the same value? Okay, well, during the COVID, we could see how that was not the case. During the COVID in hospitals, they will decide who to save first based on the amount of healthy years ahead. So they will prioritize young people over elderly, right? Of each of these questions, we'll have always a legal answer to it, even though the morally correct answer was not that clear, right? Will you condemn someone that has committed a crime if you have the certainty that they will never do it? A terrible crime, murder. Will you condemn them? Condemnations? Raise your hands. I will take pictures of this. Well, that was the answer to it. In this case, what we are talking about is about the two models of prison. In one model, prison is used as a punishment. In the other model, prison is a place where we place people to actually rehabilitate them to go back to society. Right? And these are two very different models of prison that we were talking about. So in each of these spaces, there was always like this legal code. You will enter the room, you will find this question with the two answers, and then when you were facing out, you will see what in the penal code said. Right? So it was both a didactic space, but most importantly, it was a space for debate. And I truly think this is one of the most interesting parts of data. Of course, there is data that gives you insights, but proper data and proper information design, the goal that it should have is to raise questions, to raise debates, because data cannot solve all the problems. It's not like one number will solve the problem. It's more like, okay, which is the moral idea or the ethical dilemmas or the values that we are defending with one number or the other, right? So specifically in the space of the prison, we said, what a better space to talk about justice or the future of prisons than a space where you can feel the consequences. Because there is a lot of debate on justice, but how many people understand what it means to be 10 years in prison? How many people understand the difference between 3 years and 6 years? Private of your freedom. So, and this is something that I truly like to enhance within the installations and projects we do, that is kind of this effect that happens around the installations, the physical ones. There is, first of all, kind of a very physical reaction to having to answer through a physical movement. Because when we are asked a question, we answer with our voice, words go away, right? And you go home. But then if you take a stone and you put it in a place, and that scale changes a bit, like the decision is a bit stronger. What you have done is not only a performatic or a performance in front of other people, but it also means something. You have changed something from the reality. It's not an abstract idea, right? There is a bit more of commitment to whatever you decided. And as you can see in this video, let me show you again, something really lovely happened that happens a lot of times in physical installations. that there were some people that were answering to one place, there was people that were answering to other place, but there were people that didn't want to answer. So they hacked the installation. This happens a lot with physical installations that we do. Because whenever you do a form, a survey, a digital form, people have only two choices, and they have to decide, right? But if you create a physical installation, people will figure out a way to answer what they truly believe, even though it's not designed for them, right? The other thing that I truly enjoyed about like these kind of spaces of debate is that whenever you create a physical manifestation of data, data physicalization, there is an effect that is generated around it. That is the campfire effect, right? So now we are not in a campfire effect. There is someone that is speaking in front of you. It's quite a monologue. There is like some reaction, but mainly it's me speaking, right? And there is kind of a squared design framework of people looking at me right now. With installations, it's a bit different. Normally, people do circles around installations, right? And for me, it has always reminded me a lot to whenever you go to the mountain and you start a campfire, and there is this fire in the middle, and there is people around it, the kind of conversations that happen there are totally different. People start to talk about things that are a bit more intimate, a bit more deep, and it's just because they have something physical, quite magic, that is fire, to look and talk about, right? So to talk about certain ideas that are complex ideas, we need also physical representation of these ideas manifested in three-dimensional space. We need representation, symbolic representation of the abstract in our wall, because it's difficult to maintain and sustain ideas only in the abstract wall. Whenever we have this fire, it's easy to discuss about it. It's easy to point out and say, whoa, look at what people think, right? So I will show you a couple of more projects and then we can jump into the discussion and debate. This is an exhibition that we truly enjoyed doing. It was called Design Does. It was a very odd briefing made by Elisaba, which is the biggest design school in Spain, and the Design Museum of Barcelona. And they asked us to make an exhibition about what design was, which is kind of like a terrific briefing, because you are, like, if you are a designer, you are scared. How are you gonna define what design is? So what we said was, okay, we are not theorists of design. What we will explain is what design does, right? And at that time, the Design Museum of Barcelona was a design that was very much focused in exhibition about chairs and lamps. So we wanted to somehow point out that design was a bit more than only that, even though there was a value in chairs and lamps, but there were already a lot of chairs and lamps. So maybe what we could think of was, what was the impact beyond the chair and the lamp? It was this chair doing a positive impact or a negative impact, right? So we said, what if instead of doing an exhibition, we do a citizen lab, a space where people can have opinions about design and the role of designers, right? Opinions about what is the after effect of something that they have created. So we had like this, what we call the data pass. They were like very like simple sensor spaces that you will go through the exhibition and you will be voting like several questions through the whole exhibition. We had over 15 questions about what design was doing during like these contemporary years. And there were questions like, which came first, the flag or the identity, right? Which is kind of an important topic today, about national identity. And for example, for this case, to answer that, we were using a project that has been very polemic, at least in our case, from our perspective, that is the refugee nation flag. Do you know this project? Anyone? So this project was actually designed during the refugee crisis, the Syrian refugee crisis, and during the Olympics in Rio, in Brazil. They decided to create with Ogilvy, like the communication agency, a whole branding for the refugee nation. And they invite refugees from all over the world to participate in the Olympics under this flag that was the orange color of the the safe jackets, right? It was a beautiful project. They did like an ink, they did like all the branding, all like the kind of visual aspect of a nation. For us, this was a very illustrative way that design have to tackle complex things in a very epidermic way, right? Because when we talked with some of the refugees that went to Rio, some of the things that they said were, well, the thing is that I already have a flag. The thing is that I already have an inn. I love my country. The thing is that I cannot be there because there is a war. But I don't need another flag, right? What he was saying is, I don't need another inn. I need lawyers. I need an embassy, right? And sometimes design have been somehow under the oppression of this very epidermic tool, like just solving the first layer of the problem, the more visual one, right? And on that direction, we started to ask other questions that, like, do all cultures consume in the same way? And for doing that, we started to analyze, for example, Tinder. Tinder is a tool that was designed from a Silicon Valley perspective, from this idea that you can find everything from your pocket. You can ask for food, you can ask for drugs, you can ask for the love of your life, everything from here, right? But what happens is that it was designed from a Western perspective, from a very Silicon Valley focused perspective. When Tinder was globalized and was transformed into a tool that was used all over the world, a lot of people, for example, in Egypt, in Ukraine, in Russia, in Arabia Saudi, that were using Tinder, and they were part of the LGBTQ communities, they were not only, they only not suffered acts of violence against them, and there were people using Tinder to actually track them and hunt them, but also the police themselves were using Tinder to actually prosecute people directly from the LGBTQ community, right? So this comes with the idea of how design and designers will have a responsibility on the idea of multi-stability, that we can design something for one specific place, but when this design becomes global, you have to think about all the potential outcomes it can have, and you have a responsibility based on that. And finally, one of the installations that we were doing was about automatization and artificial intelligence. Should we automatize everything? We were talking about this machine, specifically this machine gun, which is from Samsung, and is actually placed in the border of Israel and Gaza, actually, and is also used in Korea, in North and South Korea, in the borders. And this is like the only killing machine that have the whole process automatized. They can track someone, look at them, track it, and kill it without human intervention. There is no human in between. Of course, now this is deactivated, this mode, but this is something possible within the design of this weapon. And so what we did was we reconstructed the weapon. We built like the whole skeleton based on the photographies that we could take from the weapon, and we created something for the exhibition that was exactly like this. It was a weapon in the middle of a room. When you entered, it will track you, and we'll create these very uncanny effects of children playing with a gun, dancing with the robot, and at the same time you will be able to see a laser gun pointing straight to their head. And in each of these rooms, of course, there was an important question. If an innocent death is caused by an autonomous weapon, who is responsible? The weapon designer, the politician that started the war? And of course, there is not a right answer to that. I think it expands, the moral dilemma on that expands beyond that. At the end of the exhibition, there was like this big space, a big infographic space where you could see not only all your answers, but the answers of others. You could see in what things you were a bit more special, a bit more towards like a minority or a majority, right? And at the end, we were asking like this big question: what should design do? Because at the end, design, it was not only about like the generation of a chair or a lamp or a pen, but it was about what this design was provoking in people. And whenever we design tools, and now in the digital landscape this happens a lot, people is very focused on what we can produce with these tools. And I think the question should be the other way around. What these tools produce in us, what our phones create on us, in which way this modifies my behavior. This is like the real questions that we should ask as designers. Not only like when we are capable of doing. It's not only white, it's not one direction. And something very fun happened with the campaign of this exhibition. We started to do like this whole idea of how we could use very domestic daily objects to talk about, does it save lives? Yeah, it can save life. Does it do like fashion or a brick? Does it break the law or it isn't the law, right? And we started to like really like this kind of a communication campaign on the exhibition. We did like several videos.
A brick is a square-shaped boiled lump of clay. A brick can build houses, separate countries, protect from hurricanes, break the law. It's not about what a brick is, but what a brick does. It's not about what design is, but what design does. For better and for worse. Design Does exhibition, a place where there's a lot you can do.
So after that, something odd happened. We were 2 weeks after the opening, and the director of the Design Museum called me and said, we have a problem. I said, what's the problem? And he said, check the news. And then I started to check the news, and I saw how one of the far-right parties in Spain was actually saying that this campaign was inducing to violence in the streets. And I say, this is perfect. This is exactly the perfect example of how any kind of design creates an effect that goes beyond for what it has been designed. In this case, a far-right politician is instrumentalizing a campaign that is specifically talking about this, which means that he doesn't understand anything, to actually talk about his own political campaign. Again, what was interesting was that the exhibition was not just an exhibition, but was an experiment, an academic experiment where we were tracking all the data from all the participants. And we were not only tracking the data from the people of Barcelona. This exhibition then moved to other parts of the world, and specific parts of the world that were under certain circumstances where design had to do a lot with the political situation. So one of the first exhibitions was in Beirut, in the Lebanon, and it was specifically in a building that was actually bombed during the war. So it was a museum that had suffered specifically the weight of design weapons. And we created like this whole space. And then the next big step was Hong Kong, of course, a place where designing instruments of revolution was very, very, very important for a long time. It was during the Umbrella Revolution there, and after the COVID, we opened the whole exhibition at the Hong Kong Design Institute, which was like quite a crazy moment to talk about all these topics there. So beyond that, I wanted to like make this point that we talk a lot, and still today, even like the boom of big data is a bit kind of overloaded by the space of artificial intelligence. A lot of people still talks about data, and everyone wants to collect information. But somehow, a lot of people doesn't know what to do with data afterwards. What do we do with all this information? Like, why are we collecting so much data, so much information? And at the end, whenever we are thinking about information, we always say information have only sense when you put it in a sentence, when you write a story with this information, with this data, and when you create a narrative out of it, right? And if you go back in time and you try to see what are the spaces where information has somehow transcended the way we look at the world, from arts and literature to like pictorial arts, cinema, to the probably some of the most important moments in history in terms of global Western narrative, all of them, they have transcended, not for what they were, but for how they were explained to us, how they were creating specific narrative that shape our sense of the world, our sight, our way of looking at things. And data, of course, had a lot to do with that, because the people and the amount of people that die here was much less than the amount of people that die in other places in the world. And still, it have no comparison, the amount and the shape that we have about one event are the others. So, going back to this idea of narrative, I will explain the last project today, which is the Time Machine. It's one of the biggest and more surreal projects we have done. And it was a project that we did for UNICEF at the United Nations in New York. And they told us that they had a big problem in this case, that was that they have no data. They have no data specifically about childhood and health, about childhood and education, right, in several countries. And this was very problematic because, as you can, probably you have seen a lot of videos of this room. This is like the United Nations General Assembly room. Every September they meet. And at certain points of the year, in 2016, it was a very important moment. They were deciding the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and several countries were deciding which were their commitments to these goals. So imagine several countries saying, okay, we will improve education in childhood. And UNICEF was saying, yes, but what are your numbers in education and childhood? How many kids know how to read in your country? I don't know. Then how are you going to improve it? Right? If we don't have information, we don't know if we can improve a situation. And that was a problem that UNICEF had tried to explain several years. They were doing reports all over, thick reports that in several cases end up in the desks of politicians, transforming it into nothing. Right? And again, it's a thing of the medium, how this data was explained to decision makers. Right? So they were asking us, create an experience that can show this lack of data, the no data, how we visualize this, how we visualize a zero, a nothing, what we don't know. And we say, well, maybe going to do a project like this, that it was surreal. At that time, Obama was the president of the United States, Ban Ki-moon was the Secretary General. This was our audience. So imagine the surrealism. Small studio from Barcelona designing for Obama at that time. And we said, we have to do something at that level of surrealism. So we came back and we said, we will do a time machine. And they said, what? And we said, yes, we will do a time machine. We will bring back these politicians to their childhood so they realize about the importance of their childhood data. They will get back to the present and they will sign a commitment to track this information on childhood. And then, of course, the president of UNICEF at that time, he was a Republican, an ex-CIA agent, so you can imagine the kind of conservative thinking. He said, no fucking way, you're bringing a time machine here. I said, wait, let's try it. We will have a week, and we will prepare videos so you want better understand the whole experience, and then from there we can go see if it fits to the whole thing. So we prepared this video. I hope you can hear it well.
For a long time, humans have been grappling with the idea of time travel. The goal of traveling to the past or the future has always challenged mankind to push the boundaries of technology and science. For the first time now, we have managed to create the technology that enables it. Today we present the world's first working time machine, the only machine that allows you to travel to the present, the most important time we face. A machine activated through your heartbeat that will take you through a journey, asking questions about your childhood, your fears, memories, and dreams. A machine that enables you to be a child again. The time machine will transform all your childhood information into the song of your commitment, a song specifically made for you. All the songs created will form part of the commitment playlist, an album where there will be as many variations of it as there are childhoods. The machine will print a personalized commitment contract between yourself and yourself as a child. This contract will be part of the first commitment contract exhibition, an exhibition that will publicly show people's promises to better the future for children worldwide.
And the team of the video division of UNICEF were so into it. Like, they really facilitated the whole thing, which it was a complex thing. They actually gave us access to this New Jersey warehouse in a very shady space in New Jersey. And we started to set up like the whole time machine. This was an old sound booth studio for radio station, so it was totally isolated. We designed the whole experience so these high-level decision makers could be isolated, because you have to imagine that these people have the capacity of focus of a goldfish. Like, you have to truly isolate them. They cannot have like journalists, advisor, security. Like, they have to be alone, like with no more input that experience. So we had like this whole thing. We set up like the track to bring this thing to the United Nations. It was a gigantic thing, so we had to like hire a specific track without like a ceiling. And then something odd happened because the electronics were so sensitive, like we could not bring the electronics on track. We say, okay, let's bring these electronics in an Uber drive. And then we like call an Uber, and the Uber arrived to this very shady warehouse part of New Jersey. And he found Joan and myself, my partner, with this thing that looks like that. And they put like the bomb inside the Uber. And then we say, he said, well, where are you going? And we say, we are going to the United States. And then, like, it was the worst 40 minutes of this person's life. We arrived in front, all the military with the dogs, and we were like, really, he was suffering. But everything went well. We set up the time machine inside. This like the setup. This is like the hall of the United Nations in New York. This is like the hall that is right before this big room that you have seen before. And we write, so it was mirrored face, like the whole thing, to look a bit more futuristic. We wrote, this is a time machine, just to be like clear. And then like it was a bit like this. You can see the video here. It had a door, so you can enter it. And then the rest was like mirrored facing. I think on the top of it, there is like the replica of the Sputnik satellite. So it's kind of a very emblematic place in a building built by I forgot the name. Sorry. So it was like in the perfect spot. And then we decided to say, okay, now we have to design the whole experience so it can last for 12 minutes. Because this is like the amount of time that we had in the political agenda of these people. So we had over 220 people that will go through it, and we designed the whole experience to go like that. That people will enter the space, and the first thing that they will find is this kind of an exit place. They will be in total darkness, and there will be like this halo of light saying, hello, this is a time machine, and we will do a journey together. And the first thing that you have to do is to place your hand in this lit surface. There was like this sensor over the time machine where you will put your hand on your finger, and from there we will take your heartbeat from your blood. And all the time machine will replicate your heartbeat. We had like shakers down, and we had 360 sound with bass. You could hear your heartbeat amplified, boom, boom. And then we started to do questions like, did you feel safe during your childhood? Right? And the screen will open, and we'll have several lines where you would say, yes, I always feel like quite safe, or no, I didn't feel safe. And depending on that, the sound will change. So for example, for the question of, did you feel safe? You were saying yes, we were using a major scale. So the sound was a bit more happy, right? Whether if you say, no, I didn't feel safe, we would use a minor scale, a bit more melancholic. And then we were asking questions like, what did you want to be when you grow up? Right? Obama, for example, said, I wanted to be an astronaut. And you could hear in his song, 3, 2, 1, mission. And every little decision, every little answer or input or data was transformed into a sound that was added into this loop of a song of your childhood. A moment we asked, you surely had something you loved to draw when you were a child. Can you draw it again? And with every drawing, there was a new song that was added. There was a moment that all these sounds come together. There was like this kind of orchestra all around yourself with all the sounds of your childhood. And then we asked, and we said, silence. And the boy said, you have heard the sound of your childhood, but still there are a lot of childhoods that doesn't sound. because we don't have any information about it. And it is in your hands to actually change that. And at that point, inside the time machine, there was a contract that was printed. And this contract was between Obama, President of the United States, and Obama as a kid of 6-year-old, that his first love was Maggie, that his best friends were Johan, and that he wanted to be an astronaut. You could see all this data on the contract. And we did so it could not only be a circus, but it was kind of a commitment from this political class to actually change that. So it was the first political and exhibition of contracts from the United Nations. The press could go there and take pictures of who was committing to that specific goal. And this is one of the most surreal moments of my life, with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, was doing the opening of a time machine in front of me in the United Nations. And he said, "This is a time machine." And I said, "Shit, this is happening." This person truly believes that. And yeah, like, it was really amazing. Like, this person over here, he's part of, I don't know, the Secret Service or something like that. He's part of the security members of the Secretary General. And the day before the opening, he came over and he came to me and said, "Pau, this is not going to work, right?" He was like, "Yes, it is going to work." And he said, "Well, no, I mean, this is not going to send anyone back in time." And then I said, "Oh shit, what have you seen that makes you believe that this is possible?" Like, this is like even more suspicious. Like, I got like, really scared after that question because he looked really serious. But of course we got to meet like really interesting people and experiences that people had, and they aim to communicate parts of their childhood from very important people that passed by the United Nations was really incredible. Like, this experience was really nice because we somehow discovered that experiences like these influence people in the same, like at that level, in the same way that can influence us. Because all these people, at the end, there are a couple of psychopaths, of course, but there is a lot of people that have like true feelings for certain things. So whenever we talk about these things through art, music, through all these realities that are very sensory, we can actually influence them into looking at things very differently. So what we saw was that the next year there was a huge increment on the amount of times that the childhood gaps of data was mentioned during the meetings, which points out that works like this, that for me was kind of a bit skeptic, like to which level this can have an impact into a policy at that level, but I could see how it has a direct impact into the ways people were talking about the topic, right? And this came to this idea that I truly love, who is from Master Chunzi, a Confucian student, and said, "I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand." And it has a lot to do with the idea of not understanding information and data as something that we have to look or hear, but something that we have to be part of. And that's why information and info experiences can be a very powerful tool to actually shape the way we interact with very complex information and data, very important topics such as climate change, such as sudden displacement of communities. To end up, I wanted to finish with this example that I truly love. And this is something that I discovered while doing an exhibition on video games and the impact that video games have on society. I was looking and watching videos, tutorials of my favorite video games of my childhood. And then I discovered this video game from Colin Valley, and it was telling the story. So it was like the whole tutorial, and then on the comment section, there were people talking about this, like very nostalgic people, gamers, talking about this game. It's a classic race, like rally race video game. And in one of the comments, one of the YouTube users said that when he was 4 years old, her family, as Christmas present, as a present, they gave him a Colin Rally, and somehow it became kind of the game that he was playing with his father. Right? And he played for a very long time. It was kind of like their bonding space, where they will play together to this video game. And his father was a bit competitive, so he will never let the kid win. But the kid was okay, was just enjoying spending time with his father. And sadly, when he was over 9 years old, his father passed. He died of cancer. And he explained how he couldn't play anymore to the video game because he was somehow affected. He was reminding him, the video game was reminding him a lot to his father. So he kept the video game like on hold for a very long time. His Xbox went into the closet of his mother. And it was not until almost 20 years later that one day he came back to his mother's place and he discovered the video game again, and he put it on television and he started to play. And he was playing to it alone. And something very odd happened, as you will see. That was a ghost car appeared. And this is like a very classic thing. Ghost cars are kind of a memory of your best lap in the past, the best punctuation, the best race that you did. And he, of course, remembered that his father won all the races. So he said, shit, like this is my father, 20 years later. So he started to play again, 20 years later with his father. And he explained that for a week he could not stop playing with his father. He would play every day with him until there was a point that he was even better than his father. And when he was going to win, he stopped right in front of the finish line to let the ghost pass in and keep that memory, keep that faith. What is relevant for me is that this is a clear example of the green grass we have seen before. No one from Xbox or Coin Micro Rally never thought of this. Never designed this video game to be played like this. Still, for me, this is one of the most wonderful stories I have ever heard on video games. Still, this means a lot, and this is something that is shared even if you have never played this video game. There is this amazing writer, Catalan writer, Montserrat Roig, who says, si hi ha un acte d'amor, aquest és la memòria. If there is an act of love, it is to remember. And this is exactly how I think we should approach more information and information design. Data at the end is a way not only to learn, but also to remember, to recall. And it is driven through a kind of language, a specific language that can be very objective and very cold, but it can be also very warm and very welcoming. So I wanted to end up with this slide, white slide, which is a slide that is still to be designed. And I truly feel like this. I'm very excited about working in the field I do, specifically because there is a lot to do. There is so many ways in which we can improve still the way we communicate information today. And that was my thought for you today. Hope it was not long. Thank you very much.